If you're new here, my name is Tasneem Abrahams. Welcome to my channel. I share tips and tools for health professionals who want to start and grow a profitable private practice in South Africa. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button as well as the notification bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Let's get into it.
So first of all, I'd like to welcome Deon. Deon, welcome, and thank you so much for your time, especially that it's like at night and after hours family time. So I really appreciate you making the time. So for those of you who don't know, Deon is a physiotherapist. So there's this joke because I tend to interview a lot of occupational therapists because I'm one, so I know a lot of OTs. So I always say, can you see, I don't only interview OTs, I interview physios as well. So the physios in the group will be glad to see I have a physio as a guest again today. And Deon, what's great is that because you are an allied health professional, but you also have a great business acumen, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself and explain what really qualifies you to talk around the business of private practice. So go ahead, Deon.
Thanks very, very much, Tasneem, and good evening to everybody. This is an interesting platform, one I haven't been on before. We run webinars, but this is novel for me, so it's nice to be on Facebook Live. Thanks for having me, Tasneem. It's really a privilege to be here. I think just to give some background, as you say, I'm a physiotherapist. I qualified way back in 1997, and I've kind of walked the journey of healthcare practitioner. And I think, let me maybe say it up front now already that I might use the word allied healthcare professionals, and I apologize for that. But what I mean by that is we're trying to just classify the other healthcare professionals other than the doctors and the dentists and the nurses, I guess. Because every time you read about healthcare in the press, those are the kind of disciplines that's as if that's what it's all about. And as I followed this journey, I've most certainly noticed that the allied healthcare professionals are often almost the orphan children of the healthcare space. But we know very well that when a patient is seeking healthcare, they're seeking it for one of two reasons. They either have a loss of function that needs to be improved, or they're suffering from pain. And it's those two things that they want relief from. And if it wasn't for the allied healthcare sector, it's one thing getting a hip replacement, but it's something else getting back into the community, back at work, having adaptations in your home environment to allow you to cope independently and to be pain-free. And that's where the allied healthcare sector comes in, and comes in very strongly to complement that whole interdisciplinary care team. So I think that has always been something that I've observed as I've gone through my journey of healthcare practitioner in South Africa. I have also worked in the UK as well, and found, I guess, especially in rehabilitation, some really good examples of how the multidisciplinary team or the interdisciplinary team can work together and function well. So as I've journeyed through that, I've been prompted to find solutions and to put up my hand to support and empower the allied healthcare sector, and that's really what's brought me to this point.
Yeah, and when I started this whole journey of the business side of support for private practice, it comes up a lot that we are not taught this stuff in varsity. But I read somewhere that you actually do lecture in this at some universities. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I engage in a few universities, a lot around here in Gauteng, and it's usually with the final year students. So we try and prepare them. Wits, for example, has got quite a good program. It's a 2-week program in preparing their students for private practice or for independent clinical practice. Let me call it that. But most certainly the elements I come in is from the business point of view, the financial management point of view, and really how does one set up a practice and build a practice and actually prepare your practice for sale. And it sounds quite odd when I have that conversation with fourth years, because they're going, I don't even have a practice. Why would I consider selling it? I think it's with that mindset that we go in, knowing that if we take that approach, everything we do, we're preparing it for that point of sale at some point. And we're all going to get to a point where we're going to retire, emigrate, sell the practice, move on. And it's an injustice if we don't think about how we do that. And that most certainly makes one lean to a business approach, that we're actually setting up and running businesses, not just practices. Of course, you can run a non-profit organization if that's your choice. But I think many are thinking they're running a private practice, but in fact, they're running non-profit organizations. So we have to embrace that and decide what we're doing with these things, right?
Yeah. Well, two things that you mentioned there. First, point on this was something we spoke about on the phone around exit strategy, which private practice owners don't tend to think about. But in any business plan, that is something that you're supposed to include, because that indicates the health of your business, right? And then the second point about nonprofits is that I actually am one of the directors of a nonprofit, and I actually believe that even though you are a nonprofit, you should still run it with good business principles in order for the nonprofit to be sustainable. Because a lot of the problems with nonprofits is that they're so heavily reliant on charitable sources, and at some point it runs out. So how do you actually sustain that? But that's a whole topic for another day.
A very good point.
So I wanted to. So before we get started on the topic of today, which is setting your rates in private practice, can you just tell us a little bit about SpaceNet, Profnet, EasyMed? What is going on there?
All right.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. There's quite a few moving parts in our business arrangements, and we're a group of 7 companies. We're based in Centurion, and SpaceNet started in 2002. So we're talking about 18 years ago. SpaceNet started. I wasn't part of the organization at that point, but the founder members, there's still 4 of the founder members still actively involved in the business, and they stepped up to the mark to say, how do we support specialist doctors in private practice? And it started back in 2002 with very strong service-orientated focus in getting sales consultants and teams out to practices, helping them set up the practice, contracting in the practice, and really supporting them in navigating the complexities of healthcare in South Africa. But as we've gone along this journey, we've realized more and more that as technology has matured, that we need to be embracing technology to support and drive value and benefits and efficiencies really in practice. And so over the years, we've sort of moved more and more to a technology focus, obviously still with services to support that. But really, we are health technology applied is our tagline about how can we bring health and technology together and apply that in an appropriate fashion to the benefit of the patients in the end. So that was SpaceNet's journey. I joined the team about 6 years ago, where I came to them with the idea to just say, I've run a practice, I've grown a practice, I've sold my shares in a practice. And after that, I'll continue to support other practices in running their practices, both from financial and HR, and then just advisory. But I got to a point, and this sounds like a bit of a Silicon Valley story, but what really was from a converted garage, which actually I'm sitting in right now at my home, a converted garage, that was where our offices were, and it was me and 1 PA. And we did some amazing work, but then we realized we need to scale, we need to grow this thing a bit further. And I then reached out, I did some research, reached out to the SpaceNet guys, and just gave a cold call and said, listen, you've done great work in the specialist space. Let's see if we can do similar work in the allied healthcare space. And the rest is history. So we then joined and created, me and the 4 partners from SpaceNet created Profnet. And we've just gone from strength to strength there. And then again, as we realized what are the challenges facing allied healthcare professionals, we realized very quickly that a robust practice management system, or patient management application, in fact, is essential. And that was the birth of EasyMed, which is our billing system and practice management system for allied healthcare professionals.
Yeah. And, I've really been enjoying the webinars you guys have been doing. So for those of you who don't know, Private Practice Growth Club has a YouTube channel. You can just put in Private Practice Growth Club. It will come up there. And I do actually have the EasyMed channel in the recommended channels there. So you'll be able to find it there. And there's some great webinars you guys have been doing on coding, billing, ethics, all the kinds of questions that come up all the time. So you guys should go and check it out, and I'm sure you'll find some answers there to what you're looking for. But today we're talking all about setting rates. I have asked the members of the group to submit some questions, and that's what we are going to be talking about today. But maybe you can just intro with what your take is on setting rates in private practice.
Look, I'm very excited by the fact that you're asking the question, how do we set our rates in private practice? Because too few people actually ask that question. The vast majority of practitioners go straight into practice, and then the first thing they do is reach for what is the medical aid rate? What can I charge for the services I deliver? And that's not the right question. Now, the answer when you grab the medical aid benefit schedules and what they pay is what the complementary costs are that are covered by a medical scheme to a patient who's chosen that insurer to support them in their medical expenditures. managing their medical expenditure. So it's not a dictative rate at which you are worth and what you should be charging. If it happens to be an appropriate rate for your practice, well, that's all fair and well. But that only comes right at the end of the actual consideration and calculations of what your rate is. So it is an important question that too few people ask. If people say to me, how should I start my practice? Or how should I run my practice? The first thing is, can you run it as a cash practice? Can you charge those fees, the patient pays you, and they claim back from their medical aid of choice? Whether they chose a good or bad one, how much they pay, that's their problem. That they pay fees every month for a cover that they get from it. Shouldn't dictate your clinical services or how you run your practice. Now, I know it's an ideal world. We have patients that come with an attitude that if my medical aid doesn't pay for it, then I don't want it. But I do think that's slowly but surely changing, where patients are seeing value in the healthcare provider and the value that they add to their lives. Paying up front is then I guess you have to have the means to do so. But we shouldn't necessarily just default to saying we're going to do you a favor and just charge you the medical aid rate. And never mind, you don't even have to worry about paying it or following up on it. We'll do that. I'll employ an administrator to submit it to your scheme. I'll employ a credit controller to follow up with your choice of medical scheme, whether they paid me or not. And you're actually bypassing the patient's responsibility in that whole process. So I think the pertinent question is, what are my rates and how do I determine those? And then at the end, if that matches up or is close to a medical scheme rate, well, good for the patient. And that's the approach we should be taking. So I think as a prelude, that's fundamental that we ask that question, and then we can go into the nuts and bolts about what that looks like.
I think also the difficulty is that allies often feel like, if you need the GP, if the only GP you can get an appointment for in the last minute charges you like $750 and your normal GP charges you $550, you'll pay that $750 upfront if that's their policy, because right. you know there's that immediate result. You're going to get a script and a medication, and I think a lot of allies feel like they are struggling to communicate their value because it's not something that is like immediate. Like often whether it's pain management or children with development delay, it's not like there's like an instant tangible result that you can see from leaving the session. And I think that's probably do you think it's around the marketing, or how do they actually communicate their value, and then how do they actually for themselves, I think it's also a mindset issue, determine for themselves what is the value of what they are offering patients.
Yeah. Look, I think it comes back to my initial point about why patients actually seek healthcare. Your example of a GP is often, I'm a very well-motivated patient if I feel that my life is at risk, and that my child might be at risk and there's a raging temperature. I'm going to be willing to pay the $750, but I need the doctor to see me now at midnight. So there's a different motivator there. I think we do need to focus on what the value is that we add. Occupational therapy isn't just about occupational therapy and what OTs do. Physio is not just about that. What is the outcome that we're looking for? We're enabling, we're empowering, we're strengthening, we are working towards independence and pain-free existence. That's what we're aiming for, and to improve and speed up the recovery process. So that should be our focus, and I think that's where our value should be. There's nothing more frustrating than when you're going around and you introduce yourself as a physio and somebody says, "Oh, you massage, can you quickly rub here?" Or when you walk into the hospital and the sounds that happen on a patient's chest is kind of what people link with physiotherapy. But essentially, what is that? It's the means to an end, and what is that end? I think that's where the value really lies, about positioning ourselves in what that end is, and that we engage with the patients on a value-based engagement. They need to know what value they're going to be getting out of that, and we need to back that. And it does speak a little bit to what we can perhaps talk about later, the alternative reimbursement models and fee for value or fee for outcome that we should be looking at a little bit more aggressively, I believe.
I think it's interesting because this is something that I try to drive home a lot around how marketing is such a core fundamental part of how much, even in your practice management side. I always say it's almost like the heart of your business, because a lot of what you're speaking about is communicating how with value. I'm actually busy reading a book by Donald somebody, Marketing Made Simple. I'd really recommend it if anybody wants to know about marketing. But he says that a mistake that a lot of people make is they constantly talk about the solution they provide without actually identifying what is the problem that you're solving for. Exactly. So we talk about, I provide this service or I provide this, but what is that for? So if you can really, if the patient can resonate with this is my struggle and pain point, and this is the tangible transformation that you're offering through your service, then that really communicates the value better than just saying, oh, I'm an OT that specializes in sensory integration. Most lay people don't even know what sensory integration is or why they need it. So, so I think one of the, if we can just go through the questions, somebody asked, is there a guideline if you don't want to charge medical aid rates?
Sure. So I think the previous point I made about the question being right to ask about how do I determine my own rates and should I determine my own rates, I don't think we've fully answered that one. So I'm going to try and weave that in with this one too. Because if you're determining your own rates, which should be a departure point, one is to have a method that you follow and see where you end up. And then within which framework or guidelines. So let's first talk about the framework or the guidelines. Now, there we obviously have to turn to, I think the majority of your followers on Facebook are HPCSA registered. There may be some that are allied HPCSA registered or social workers or nurses. But I think the regulation is pretty similar in these frameworks. I'm going to use HPCSA as a cornerstone, I think, in what I'm going to explain now. And perhaps those who are not HPCSA registered can look at how that translates into their space. But essentially, the HPCSA gives us a framework about how we can bill, what our bill should look like, and the ethics that goes around both the patient interactions and the billing for those services that we provide. But there's more to it than that. We obviously have a framework that the medical schemes are anticipating as far as an industry standard about how we bill and what we bill for. And we need a common language that we're using when we do our billing. So it's important that if you're presenting yourself as an HPCSA registered practitioner, that you then are compliant with all of these. And part of that is saying you identify me as an occupational therapist. I'm duly qualified at the HPCSA. Here's my registration, and they've also accredited the university at which I got my degree. So first and foremost, you know who I am as an OT. The second part is I'm now going to be billing for services provided, and there's an anticipated framework about what that bill looks like. The HPCSA gives quite clear guidelines on that, but it has developed a lot more than that as far as the FISC guidelines. Now, FISC isn't a statutory body, but they've definitely given guidelines as a standard billing framework that we should be using. And so we need to be sensitive to that too. And then as that bill comes through from an occupational therapist, obviously there's an OT practice number from the Board of Healthcare Funders, your PCNS number. But most importantly is then the code or the tariff that you're charging. And yours would start with 66 and then 501 or whatever the code might be. And there's a common language about what that code means, what the services is that has been received for that code, and then a proportionate value between that and a 66503, for example. It's not to say that there's a fixed fee on that one. We're not in a fixed set fee environment, like the single exit prices that occurred for pharmacy. But you do need to know that if one intervention or one modality is half the time of another, that the costs would be pretty much double that price. So you'll see that in our RPL structure, which we all recognize dates way back to 2010, that the RPL structure has an RVU, which is a relative value unit, which speaks about the weight. So the one will be 10 units and the other one will be 20. In other words, this one's twice the price of that one, has twice the amount of engagement, time, risk, cost of equipment, and so on. So that whole science that goes behind that. So I think the first and foremost thing is what framework are we billing against? And we need to keep that framework intact. We can't just come up and thumbsuck a number and put that on a claim and a different description and a price. No one knows what's going on. How's the scheme supposed to reimburse the patient for the fees that they've paid for that? So we have to use that framework, I think, first and foremost. Then the second part to that is now what is that rand value at the end that you're going to be charging? And people often look at that and just say, well, I'm going to plug in a medical scheme rate and hope for the best. But that's on the one side. Then on the other side of their business plan or their dream, they can see that there's a partial weight treadmill machine in the corner and there's a computer-based exercise equipment there and assessments on this side. There's a cot nab on this side and there's fees and costs to that and all of the rest. And so that they're living the dream this side, but they're not balancing with the revenue on that side. So what I would recommend we do, I think what's so important is that you mentioned earlier the business plan, and that in your business plan, you obviously got a financial forecast as well. And you're going to go into that forecast and say, what's going to cost me to set up my practice? Rand values of all the equipment I'm dreaming of. That already puts me in the negative 100,000. Then I open my doors, and then I start generating revenue, and I anticipate 4 patients per day the first month, and then it goes up to 5, and then hopefully up to 9, and so on. And you do these predictives. Excel is just an incredible tool. So
I love Excel.
People say to me, what should I study or what program should I learn? Excel, because you can run scenarios. You can do so much planning in that one. Now, no business has ever succeeded on Excel, but at least it gives us a framework that we can look at and understand the impact of some of the decisions we make, right? So that financial forecast is important. And in that, we list what the salary is we expect to pay ourselves, salary for the staff that we're employing, the equipment that I'm buying, the stationery, all the costs, your EasyMed license, whatever else it might be, you're going to factor into that. And you're going to see it's going to cost me 50,000 Rand to run my practice every month, including a salary of 20,000 Rand. And then I'm also expecting a return on investment of 20% if I'm a for-profit organization. And as you rightly say, if I'm non-for-profit, it's just the profit line that changes. The rest, you have to make sure that you have astute financial policies and management in place. But you're going to say, I'm expecting a return on investment for the risk that I'm taking of 20%. It might be 30. I've seen some practices manage up to 40%. Our previous Minister of Health, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, made it clear we shouldn't be profiteering, but it doesn't mean we can't profit from our businesses, because the profit is what gives us future longevity of the service we're offering, and stability to that. So you got to factor all that in, and then you're going to get to a bottom line number that says, I need 70,000 Rand a month to come in. Now, on all the patients I've seen, that all accumulates to so many patient treatments, 70,000 divided by that. And generally, on average, I should be charging this amount per session. Now, that doesn't mean I can tempt people to do on that amount, but it gives me a ballpark of what I should be charging. And if you then go and use your codes and you look at a typical treatment, you take a medical aid rate and it comes up to that rate, well done. You can run your practice on medical scheme rates. If it's not, it's private rates. If you want to do medical scheme rates, well, then you've got to go back and say, okay, I no longer need this equipment. I'm going to pay myself less here, and my profit margins are different there to make that resonate. But it's so important to do the balance, right?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're bringing this up. And with the Excel, I actually just, Yumna is watching and she's in the academy, and I actually just finished uploading videos now where I gave them a template Excel sheet, which already creates the formulas and links all the sheets together. But basically I told, what I teach them to do is on the one side to list all their personal expenses so that they can determine what salary they want to actually come out with. And then on the other side, all the business expenses, and the amount that they total at the end with their personal expenses automatically becomes their salary amount in the business expenses side. And then to list things like you said, and to also be clever with tax. So like if they can put their mobile phone bill into the business expenses and things like that, and then it comes up with, like you said, the total expenses, and then that tells them how much they need to generate in revenue every month and per year. And then they need to list out what are all the different services. So is it assessment? Is it intervention? Is it group work? And then list all those out and then play around with some numbers, because as they'll see what the deficit is, so then they can increase the numbers and until they see that they're happy. And I've said to them as well, like you said, you need to put in your profit. And then also there's a lot of, uproar around how locums are being paid, because people want to pay a commission base when they're not supposed to. And I actually said, if you pay locums a fixed rate, which is more fair, it's actually better for you as a business as well, because you're then more able to forecast what you're going to be paying rather than having this, fee that's very variable. So it's basically, I highly recommend as well, like you say, just put those numbers into a simple Excel sheet. It will just help you so much to kind of determine. And also sometimes you can see then that if there's certain types of services that you are offering that is maybe not profitable and there's not a lot of patients for that, then you also know, okay, stop spending all your marketing trying to get those patients in, and actually maybe it's not a good idea to be trying to get more of those in. They're not really, doing your business any good. So so I'm so glad that you brought that up.
No, you're right. I think there's 2 points that come up, if I may just respond to 2 elements there. I think it's extremely important to balance obviously your household expenditure and what you're required to come home with in a month, and make sure your practice is servicing that and potentially more. So that you've got profit margin. But the error I see a lot of practitioners doing is that many practices are running as solus practitioners. Now, I think that's a challenge in itself. And I guess if you want to close your shop at the end of the day, solus practitioner status is probably not a bad way to go. But if you're wanting to build that into an asset in a business, then I would seriously advise people to consider incorporated practice or some other processes to try and stabilize that and move the practice off their personal name. But be it as it may, I think many practitioners are running as solus practitioners or solus practices. But what they then do is they also run their practice in their personal account, their bank account.
Yeah.
And they say to the BHF, you can pay, medical aids can pay me in my personal account, and it's the same account the Woolworths account comes out of. It's the same one we pay Johnny's school fees and so on. So if anything, I can recommend just the simple discipline of splitting the two accounts, even if they're both savings accounts, and at the end of the month, transferring yourself a salary and leaving some money behind in that other account. Because that money that you leave behind is part of your financial policy and ensuring the stability of your practice.
Absolutely. And I think also the big mistake of not planning for profit as well. So, accounting for the expenses, but you actually need to build up that little runway, because in a situation like this now with COVID, if you had that 3 to 4 month runway building up in your practice, then you would have been fine during this time.
Correct.
And a lot of people are not doing that. They don't add that as something to account for.
Sure. What we've advised people for many years now, and as you rightly say, COVID has now just gone and tested that, of who actually listened to the advice, is create yourself a financial policy. And the first financial policy, and I think the most important one, is that work out what it costs you to run your practice. So the previous example, you say 70,000 Rand. You should at least have 3 months of that 70,000 Rand stored up in your account. So that only when you get to 210,000, that next 1,000 Rand is the 1,000 Rand you can play with. Because you need that 3 months that should something happen, and it's just crazy how it's come true, should something happen to your practice that you can get 0 revenue for 3 months, you at least got, or for a while, you at least got 3 months to pivot, find a new way of getting your revenue. Your landlord might evict you, and you have to find new premises. So you're giving yourself 3 months to find your feet again. And that money that stays there, that's the money you owe to your staff and to yourself and to the patients to ensure that your practice stays stable in this time. And we have always advised between 3 and 6 months. So work out what your overhead costs are, including your own salary, and times that by 3 to 6 months, and make sure that gets squirreled away. Put it in your bond account. Reduce your interest on your bond, but know that it's available as an access bond to pull out. Should
as
there be
an access bond?
For the rainy day, and guess what? It's been raining since March.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I always say, because we had in order accountants on, he gave some great advice around tax and all of that. And I always find it so funny that people would be hesitant to pay an accountant, but they will pay for this fancy equipment and stuff. Where to me, I'd rather pay my accountant than then pay something else, because that is such a fundamental part, is to have a financial thing and somebody advising you properly how to be tax efficient, how to put away. And if need be, maybe you can even invest some of that as business, have somebody who's a financial advisor. It's important to invest in those things and not just kind of think of the DTVP2 and the whatever assessment that costs thousands and thousands when you convert the dollars, to kind of get the building blocks in place first.
Right. I mean, we often pay the school fees of pretending we're an accountant, we're a lawyer, we're an administrator, we're a credit controller. We think we can do that all ourselves, and we pay the price later on, and you can't recover from that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm going to move to the next question. Somebody asked, as a new therapist, do you factor in a therapist's experience when setting rates?
So again, I think that's a twofold question or twofold answer. The first one is coming back to your calculation. Experienced therapist is probably going to look at this and go, you know what? I've earned 20,000 Rand since I qualified. I think I'm worth 60 or 70, or the state sector people on my level are earning more than I am. And you'll benchmark your own salary. Put that back into your financial forecast, into your budget, and then work that out and say, well, either I need to see more patients in a day to get this money, or I need to be charging more per patient. So then you have to review that and see where that lands. I've consulted with many practices where one, for example, was a very well-known sports physiotherapist who'd done physio for Olympic teams and traveled the world and all the rest. and he was still charging medical aid rates. And this poor guy was working from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. And I said to him, his name's not John, but I said, John, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You've got a queue of people. They can't see you. Books are so full. You're working 6 to 6, and you're charging medical aid rates. Bump your price up, double your price. Even if you halved your patients at double the price, you'd still have a queue standing outside, because you've got a good reputation, you've got a good experience, and you've got further qualifications. So you know what? Embrace this and play golf on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, I think it's a question of, and I actually did a live in the group recently where speaking about like the different growth strategies. So you can either increase your prices, or you can increase your patients, or you can pivot and have a different offer, like a passive income stream or something. But you have to decide based on your lifestyle what is going to work for you. So if you are a newly qualified therapist, assuming you don't have kids yet, you're still young, then use that time to actually rather, if you don't feel confident charging more, to rather than hustle and get as many patients as possible, because that will also help with the experience that you're trying to get. And then as you gain experience and feel more confident in your value that you're offering, you can raise your prices and thereby decrease your patient load. So it really is about assessing, and this is why I always say to people, you need to upfront already, before you even decide to start the practice, decide what your vision is for what your ideal practice is going to look like, and then build the blocks toward that eventual reality. So I hope that answered the question for whoever answered. And those of you who are watching live, please do feel free to drop your questions in the comments. Then somebody asked, I don't know if this is true, but they said, why is it frowned upon to state or advertise treatment rates clearly in advertising?
Okay, so I think again we'll firstly go back to our regulator and say, what does the regulator say about advertising price? And the first thing is they say that one should not draw undue attention to pricing. And what the intention there is, and you always have to ask, what are they doing to protect the public or to guide the professions in this one? And they're protecting the public in that. I don't know if you remember what was that voucher system where you could go online and get Groupon, exactly that. Yeah. And I think that was just such a good example, because I've got a picture of an optometrist right next to a beautician, and these two are vying for the same eyes to say, come and see me. And their biggest drive is not what I do differently, my value of my services. It's none of that. My experience is none of that. It's just going, I'll offer you 60% discount. Now, ask yourself a question. What are we doing to the profession if we're going to start having trade wars on price and driving that down and trying to get people into it just because we got the latest special? We're not selling a DSTV subscription or we're selling healthcare. This is important stuff. I mean, somebody else used this example. Let me change the example slightly. But who would go to a cardiologist that's offering massive discount? He's going to operate on your heart transplant, right? Yeah. You're going to go to who's the best. You're not going to go to who's the cheapest. So let's not sell ourselves and go for cheap services. That's really not what the public is interested in, and it's not what we should be aspiring for. We should be aspiring for value. So if you're advertising and saying 10% discount this month alone, it's bringing undue attention to price, and it's against the ethical regulations. You may not do that. That doesn't mean you can't give somebody 10% discount. It just means that you can't have a billboard that says 10% discount and then your practice at the bottom. You can have your practice there and say what your special interests are, what your core focuses is, and what the value of your profession is. I think we could have a whole webinar just on marketing and advertising. But to me, when somebody's asking the question, how do I market and advertise? The first thing I want to say is, well, how about you step away from trying to market and advertise yourself and advertise your profession? If you had to have a massive billboard next to the N1 highway, and you are allowed to do that, the marketing regulations have changed, but you put a sign up there and you say, the value of occupational therapy is the following. Should you require occupational therapy, here's one place you can go to. Otherwise, go to instop.co.za and get the closest occupational therapist to you. You're doing a massive service for your industry, for your discipline, and for your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen those ads for like the male gynae. They recently did a huge PR campaign, and I've seen their billboards, and then they don't advertise the company, that the logo's on there and the number, but they basically say some thing about why men need to go and see whatever this company, and that's what it's more. And I've always said, like, people are so scared of the marketing. At the end of the day, as long as you're not making yourself out to be the best, and you're not making your profession to be better than the next, like you're OT better than physio or so and so forth. And it's really about educating and informing the public. And by that you actually build up authority, and people will then come to you because they get to know, like, and trust you. But also, I was surprised by that question, because I had back in the early days when I first started with digital marketing, I had a client whose website I did, and they were medical aesthetics practice. And I mean, they listed their prices on the website. It just wasn't like front and center. It wasn't part of the advertising. It was more part of the customer journey. Somebody comes to the website, and then they go to the service, and they want to know, well, how much is it going to cost for me to have this Botox? The prices are listed there, but it's just not like kind of flashing lights around the prices. So
exactly. I think one can add that as a service, and you do need to inform your patients of the price of your services. They have to engage in an informed financial consent process. So you have to tell them what your prices are. But it's not undue attention or unprofessional attention to your pricing. So there's one thing having your pricing on your website. It's something else going, my competitors' prices, our prices, slash it by 50%. This is where we are. But if you order now, you're going to get another 10% discount. I mean, that's not professional. Well, we are professionals, right?
Yeah, and also with the incentivizing patients. So saying that if you book now, you will get whatever free thing, or you can't do that as well. So talking about discounting and things like that, somebody did ask, is it ethical or allowed to set rates according to a client's income bracket to cater for low income groups, or is similar in government? If so, how would one inform potential clients of this if we aren't allowed to market discounted prices? I think many low-income households do not seek out therapy because they assume that private practices do not offer discounted rates.
So that is an interesting one, and I'm gonna reference the Consumer Protection Act in this one as our framework to talk about. And what's interesting here is the simpler example on this one is, and it ties to the same thing. What about the elderly? Somebody comes into my practice, they're retired, they're asking for pensioners discount. Now, is it okay to offer them a discount where somebody else doesn't get a discount? And the same would apply to LMS. It would apply to various other scenarios we can raise. The important thing here is that the Consumer Protection Act states that you are allowed to discriminate. Doesn't that sound strange? It says you're allowed to discriminate, but it must be fair discrimination. So we often just use the first word. Discrimination is wrong, and I agree with that. But it's unfair discrimination. It's unfair to discriminate based on color, on religion, on all of those things about where you can go and how you can move and so on. But there is a thing called fair discrimination, and fair discrimination is okay. And the example I always use is if my son has just finished, he's in university, I'm looking for cheap digs for him. So I found an old age home around the corner that's really got a very lovely place, and there's a doctor right there, and their fees are really reasonable. But for some reason, they wouldn't let a 22-year-old go and live there. Now, that's discrimination, right? So I can rightly say they discriminated against my son by not allowing him to live in an old age home. Fair enough. It's true. It's discrimination on age, based on age. But is it fair discrimination? And so that's where the question really lies. Is it fair discrimination? So again, we use the same example for people who might come in and say private patients get a 10% discount or 20% discount versus medical aid patients. Is that discriminatory? Yes. Is it fair discrimination is the question. And I would say, yes, it is again. Because my administrative processes and the costs of running a service to a medical aid patient, which is creating the claim, sending the claim electronically, following up on the claim, all of that burden of that sits on me as a practice versus the guy standing in front of me willing to give me hard-earned cash right now in my hand. I don't have to wait 2 months for it. I'm going to get it right now, and I'm guaranteed I'm going to get it. Surely there's a difference. So I can say to him, I'm going to encourage people to pay me cash and claim back from the medical schemes. I'm going to offer 10% discount. Now, the other guy standing in the queue behind this oak that's just paid 10% less than me will come and say, hey, that's not fair. You charged him 90 Rand. Why are you charging me 100 Rand? You're going to then say, because he's paying privately in cash, I'm doing your medical aid. If you also want the discount, you're welcome to pay me cash. There's nothing unfair about that. Right? So that's how we need to just litmus test it. The error that people make, though, is they create their base rate and you're allowed to discount from that, right, appropriately. But you can't create a base rate and then look out your window and notice the guy's just arrived in the latest SLK Merc and go, hold on a second, guys, we're not billing our normal rate. This I can afford it. Let's load this account. Right? That's now unfair again.
Yeah. I think what I'm taking from what you're saying is that basically you need to decide upfront what your policy is going to be. So if you decide upfront that your policy is going to be that you're going to offer pensioners discount, and that for low income brackets below a certain amount or private patients you're going to offer, then that's what you're going to stick with. You're not going to chop and change according to, like you said, what the patient that's standing in front of you. You need to decide upfront what your policy is around how you're going to be charging. But the question was also around how do you communicate that to lower income, because you don't I'm guessing they want to know, how do you let lower income bracket clients know that you do actually offer a special rate if they can't afford therapy?
I would be careful about marketing and advertising that specifically. Again, you don't want people specifically coming to you because of your pricing. They should be coming to your service and knowing, but you offer, a good primary dental care, and they're coming to you. And when they come and they fill in their forms, and this is important, is that there's very seldom a pause point as far as informed clinical consent and informed financial consent before you touch the patient. If you touch the patient without informed clinical consent, it is in the eyes of the law considered assault. You've touched that patient without their permission. So go through the due processes and pause. And it's in those conversations where the patient will say, I'm paying cash, I can't afford a medical aid. Well, we do have specific brackets relating to that should you need any financial relief as far as the services that we offer. And this is our scales, and this is how you qualify for the different ones. We'd like to assess it based on the following criteria. Let us know, we need to see a pay slip, whatever it might be, that you then have your entry criteria to qualify them for that specific rate. But that is conversational, and that's as you're engaging with the patients. But to put it up on a billboard and say, should you be earning less than 5,000 Rand a month, we can offer you service at close to for free. I think one would just check that for fair discrimination and for comparative advertising and bringing undue attention to price.
Yeah. And then somebody asked, in a small town with only a few therapists, is it legal, permissible, or ethical to meet up to established rates for 2020, meaning we all ask the same rate for all patients?
So I'll give a one-line answer. You will go to jail.
Yes, this has come up in the group before. It's price fixing.
The Competitions Commissioner has been very, very firm about this. That is price fixing. We've seen it in the banking industry. We've seen it in the bread industry. We've seen it now in the healthcare industry, the health market inquiry. And they will fine you. They find one of the associations we work with, I think they fined them R1 million. They fortunately managed to get off with a warning. And I think the South African Medical Association, SAMA, was fined, I think it was 3 million, and even the BHF was fined. So be careful, they will fine you. But now, yes, the contradiction to all this, Tasneem, is that on the one hand, they're saying we may not price fix. Now, the question is, but don't medical aids price fix? Well, apparently they're allowed to set the benefit rate. It's not price fixing. We can still charge what we like, and we should charge what we feel we're worth. But now, yes, the other part is that after the health market inquiry, and if you speak to government officials on where we're moving with healthcare, we are most certainly, just like pharmaceuticals moved into that single exit price, the SEP, which is price fixing by the government to say you may only charge this medication. It looks like we might be going to that in our healthcare space as well. But it's not us that's fixing the price. It's a regulator or an authority that can do that, but not ourselves.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that with the petrol being a deregulated market, that's also a form of price fixing.
It's supposed to be good for competition, us setting our own prices.
Yeah. I'm just checking what other questions we have. There's one last one here. Can one charge a fixed rate per assessment or session, and can one undercharge? Is it possible to undercharge? I think that's what they're asking.
So firstly, the fixed rate I would really warn against. I've in fact just jumped off a special general meeting of one of the associations where they're addressing forensic reviews and audits by medical schemes. And trust me, if any of your listeners have been on one of these or been through that process, it is a nightmare. You don't want to go through that. Now, why am I raising that? The first warning flag that goes up from these forensic review systems, because there's a system that analyzes and flags you and then reports that for further investigation, is when you do template billing. So if you're using the same ICD-10 code or small basket of ICD-10 codes, people often call it a cheat sheet. you're looking for trouble. You can't just be using 10 different codes. I'm sure your patients are more variable than just 10 conditions. And then again, on your codes that you use to charge for, if you've got the same price for all patients, some patients are complex, some are simple. Some can't manage a whole session, some can. Some don't arrive for their session, but everyone's getting the same price and the same set of codes, you're bound to get flagged up for a forensic review. You need to first assess the patient, look at what their condition is, and code the ICD-10 code appropriate to the patient in front of you, not the code on your cheat sheet, and use a sophisticated search engine, hopefully within your practice management system. I know a good one that can do that for you on the fly. And then once you've treated the patient, you then reflect back and say, here's my clinical notes. This is what I did. What are the relevant codes that are related to what I did? Not what I want to charge or what that amount is that I have to get out at. And I'm going to keep loading codes until I get the price I was looking for, because that's happening. So having a set rate gets yourself very quickly into trouble. You need to be billing. You can have a set a percentage higher than a medical scheme rate. You can have a set RAND conversion factor off your RVU, but you can't have a set rate for everybody because not everyone's getting the same treatment. So please be careful.
Yeah.
You had a second part to that question, though.
Well, she asked, can one undercharge in inverted commas? So I think she's asking, is it possible that one is undercharging?
Very often, go back to your Excel, check what it looks like. Go and look at Tasneem's Excel to help you work out your practice cost. Look at what that looks like. If you're charging medical aid rates, but you're running your practice on some other higher level, then you are going to be undercharging. So the question is, are you undercharging for yourself and the services that you're delivering?
Yeah. That links to what somebody asked now in the group. How do you calculate the base rate based on expenses? So, it's going to be different from practice to practice, for instance. So I might just do a YouTube tutorial on that worksheet, but that is something that's only in the academy. But somebody also asked, so does that mean you can't quote a patient? Because I think this is relating to the templates that you spoke about.
You definitely need to, because now you sit with a position where a patient needs to sign informed financial consent. But informed financial consent on what? So you could even have a list and say, I charge the medical aid rate, or I charge 20% more than the medical aid rate, or whatever your rate is. And they go, that's really great, but how many of these codes are you actually going to be using? He has 64 codes. You're going to be using all of them? No, some of them? Well, I don't really know. An initial assessment is typically these codes, which typically comes to this amount. And the most complex kind of treatment is typically these codes and would come to that amount. So your range is between this and that. That's what you can expect. Okay. But I can only tell you what I'm going to be charging once I actually do the treatment and I've assessed you and I apply the treatment that I think is appropriate to you. So it's important to give them a range, or at least some kind of ballpark or a quote on what it's going to cost and how many sessions are going to be required, so they can actually do their financial planning. But it is a quote. It's not a set rate. It's just an indication of what the cost could be.
Yeah, I think that is an important differentiation to make, that a quote is not necessarily not an invoice. So somebody has to accept the quote and then you invoice actual. And I think that also comes back to, like, when it comes to administration of your practice, things like your policies, your terms and conditions, all of that needs to be really clear. So on a quote, usually in your accounting software, whatever software you're using, usually there is a place where you can put notes there to say, this is not the final invoiced amount. This is just a quote based on all those things that you said, so that the person that it might be more, it might be less.
Yeah, we often put
and
a thing
I
there
would say
saying
even
Sorry, Tasneem. I think we often put the wording there saying the pricing is indicative or indicative pricing. The final price can only be confirmed on treatment, but this is a range at which you could expect. Yes, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, no, I was saying, even you can even change the word quote to estimate and not call it a quote, if it makes it a little bit more clear. Somebody asked a question which I don't think we will have time to answer today, but I think that is maybe for another time, where they asked, how is preferred providers fair? Because I know that is an issue that's come up recently, with the medical aids and the preferred providers, the network providers. And I know that there's a lot of things happening currently in the whole schemes act and all of those around that. So I don't think we can get into that. So I don't know if you want to just make a quick comment about that, and then we can address the last question.
So a quick comment on that is we best get used to the network arrangements and the preferred provider networks, because they are a thing that has been rolling through the healthcare industry. In our SpaceNet group, we can see what's happened. It started off with hospitals, then specialist doctors, then GPs, and is coming into the allied healthcare space. So prepare yourself for it. It's not going away. It's part of managed healthcare. It is in the Managed Healthcare Act. Schemes are enabled to do that, and they are encouraged to, in fact, do that. Create networks, group together, make sure that you're grouping around the patient-specific needs, that we're not fragmented in our service provision, that we are in an interdisciplinary approach in our healthcare. Networks are good for these, the interdisciplinary networks. But one thing that is very important is if you are going to sign any agreement related to joining a network or a designated service provider status, preferred provider status with a medical scheme, read that document. Take it to your lawyer if you're not sure what those words mean, but make sure you know what you're signing before you sign it. And then secondly to that, the barrier to entry on networks needs to be low enough that anybody can join, any willing participant. So if there's networks that look like gentlemen's clubs, that the walls are so high and the costs are so high to join it, you can challenge that at the Council for Medical Schemes and say that this network is discriminatory and it's exclusive. And it needs to be inclusive. So that's just one of the provisos. So if you ever feel that it's impossible to be part of a network, then you need to be reporting that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's some great advice. But this question really does link kind of to the last bonus question that I had. And then we can, I'd like you to speak a bit more about Profnet and EasyMed. I just want to let Yumna know if she's still watching. I do have Yumna, I know we have a coaching call, but I know you're on here as well. So I'm sure you don't mind if we start your coaching call a little bit later. The question that I had as a bonus question was around what the impact of NHI will be on how private practice owners set their rates.
Sure. So fortunately, I'll tell the viewers you've given me a heads up on that bonus question. Thank you for giving me a heads up. This is complicated. So the NHI, I'll be lecturing on that to the Mediclinic group in a couple of months' time, and it's an interesting conversation about where is NHI and where is it going. I think the first thing we must all recognize is that NHI is happening. It's not whether it's going to happen. It's busy happening around us. There are many elements of the healthcare space already that are indicative of NHI busy realizing itself. So they ain't stopping this. It does get extra boosts every now and again when it becomes a political football, but it is moving forwards. I would encourage people to have a look at the green and the white paper on the NHI, as well as the more recent documents and the regulation around NHI, because it is there, it's written. But one of the most important things about it, and I fully embrace this, is that people are saying, how do I determine my fees and what's the impact on my rates going to be? But we're currently in a fee-for-service environment. You do a certain thing, you look on the list, that's the thing I did, and that's what you charge. Regardless of whether the patient got better or not, whether it was appropriate or not, it's just you bill it, you've done it, we'll pay it, regardless of how well the patient gets or not. Now, we have to move away from a fee-for-service model to a fee-for-value or a fee-for-outcome model. And you already see it in the NHI documents that they're talking about alternative reimbursement models, ARMs. I'd encourage people to start looking at that. Alternative reimbursement models are typically things like global fees, per diem rates, capitated rates, and so on. So what they will do there is there's already interventions like this in hip replacements, where the physio, the OT, the anesthetist, the orthopedic surgeon, and the prosthesis and the nurse in the hospital is all bundled into one amount, and they pay that amount. So your incentive is to try and get the patient better quicker because you can get more bang for your buck. If it takes you long, you still get the same amount of money, but you can only discharge the patient on certain outcomes. And so it's important that we're able to measure outcome measures, that we best practice guidelines, and then we frame that in a risk-sharing model. So that's kind of, I think, what NHI is going to do is drive the alternative reimbursement models forwards.
Which I think is, at the end of the day, is just going to make our professionals be more accountable. I mean, it's drilled into us at varsity level that we need to have evidence-based practice and outcomes-based practice. But in reality, I think if we're all honest, there's a lot of therapists out there who are just, going with the flow, doing treatments and not doing outcomes-based practices, which is what we should be looking at as the gold standard.
That ties nicely back into the first conversation we started off. Yeah. We started off with a conversation about how do you show to the patient, and it's about your outcome measures. Are you measuring them and showing the patient you started here and now you're here? So let's continue the journey. That's another way of getting their buy-in. Yeah,
and absolutely. I mean, I keep saying in the marketing, you can't obviously make promises and say, I'm going to make you better. But in your marketing, you need to identify this is what the person is struggling with. this is what you want to help them to achieve. So it's about helping, it's about recognizing and helping your ideal patient feel seen and heard, that you understand what their pain is and that you understand what their desired outcome is, and that you're not making any promises that you 100% can achieve that, but you definitely have the skills and the tools available to help them on that journey toward that desired outcome, even if you're just one small piece of the puzzle. And if you communicate that in your marketing messaging on your websites and all of that, instead of just talking about me all the time, it's really not about you. You should be talking about your patient and what they're struggling with. That's what's going to get you more patients in your door. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much. I think we've covered most of the questions. And I think if people have any, please just keep asking questions. And if you're watching this on the replay, just say #replay with your question. And I think I want to just end off because I was reading up on Profnet on the website, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Why aren't all people part of Profnet? So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what exactly is Profnet and what would be the advantages of somebody becoming a member and so on.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So Profnet, again, as I can say, is there for all the healthcare professionals other than the doctors. We are there to support. We have psychologists, physios, OTs, speech therapists, biokineticists, podiatrists, the list goes on, that are members of Profnet. Watch the space. We have some interesting movements into networking on bringing in allied healthcare practitioners into complementing and completing the circle of care, for example, for diabetic patients and so on. So we're tackling that. And we are looking out for networks and groups of allied healthcare practitioners that will join us and be part of the ecosystem, so we can refer patients onto them, set accreditation criteria and standards on those, link you up and get you better reimbursements and payments for those services, and link you up to the patients that need the services that you specifically have a special interest in. So Profnet really is there to support new practices, setting up their practices and running their practices, established practices, getting all kinds of services right from a website at no additional cost. We'll host it, we'll run the whole website for you, to preferential credit card rates, which are dramatically different to what you're going to get directly from a bank, and will save you all your fees in Profnet membership fees and more. The employment contracts for your staff, we help you with that. Employment contracts of your clinical and non-clinical staff. Your contracts with your patients, we assist with. There's a multitude, right from NAPI codes, ICD-10 codes, your procedure codes. What is the rate for Discovery, Classic, Comprehensive, for occupational therapy or speech therapy? We have all of that available for you. You just browse that through and we give you the latest news and updates. So Profnet really is there to support and service the allied healthcare professionals. And furthermore, we have preferential malpractice insurance offerings also, which really are at really great rates and with good policy wording to really protect you and your staff. So that's kind of the Profnet side. That's the being a member of Profnet. And then EasyMed really is the billing system to help you manage and run your practice effectively and efficiently. It really is a brilliant system. We've recently integrated telehealth into the system. You can electronically switch your claims. You can send SMSs and emails all in one place. You can even receive your remittance advices back from your medical aids electronically as well and auto-recon those. So there's a lot to talk about, but I'd encourage you to have a look at easymed.solutions is our website. And profnetmedical.co.za for the Profnet benefits. But yeah, have a look at EasyMed. We'd love to have you guys on board.
Yeah, I will definitely share all the links, and as well, once I've put this on YouTube, I will put all that information. But like I told you guys at the beginning, if you've just joined, if you go to the YouTube /Private Practice Growth Club, in my recommended channels, I do have the EasyMed channel, so you can go and check out some of the amazing videos you can learn. I promise you, is the EasyMed webinars are jam-packed with the same kind of value, so you can learn a lot there and link to their website and all of those kinds of things. So thank you so much, Deon. I think everybody has really enjoyed it. Kati, I see you say you're only getting on now. Don't worry. The replay will still be available in the group up until the time that I take it off to put it onto YouTube, and then you can watch it there. But everybody's saying that they've gained so much. So thank you again for your time.
It's a big pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's nice chatting.